Okay, and we can start. So today's research talk will be delivered by Charlie. I don't need to introduce Charlie, you all know Charlie. And the topic of the talk is, you can already see it on the screen, the impact of the pandemic on musicologists' use of technology. So we will have the talk by Charlie, that will be followed by a discussion, and I will record the first part, just the talk. So Charlie, whenever you're ready, you can start.
Yeah, bring that up. Need a touch screen then. Okay, thanks everybody here and there and in the sky. Welcome to a talk that I can do about some research I've been doing over quite a long period with my colleague Frans Veering at Utrecht University. We've known each other for a long time. We actually met in the same geographical location for probably about 10 years. But we do have a healthy Zoom relationship around our work. And we did a survey a little while ago, around 2014-15, of musicologists' adoption of technologies in their research practices. And then during the pandemic, obviously that had impact on all sorts of things. So we followed up the survey. So I'm going to be talking about the follow-up survey, the impact of the pandemic on musicologists' use of technology. The acronym, WDMDAD, it's easier as you go. We stole from a children's book. Richard Scarry is the author. What do people do all day? So what do musicologists do all day? It's the full title of our ongoing research. And we've got a previous publication in the archives of the SMER Music Information Retrieval Conference, which reports on our previous survey. So the aim of the project in general is to get a better understanding of musicologists' daily use of digital technologies and their attitudes. So not just measuring, what do they use, but we think it's really important to know about how they feel about those things, so that we can make recommendations to software developers and research support around how those musicologists live what is their information around digital technology specifically. So Frans has some expertise in HCI and human-centered design, and he's done a lot of work in the musical information retrieval community over the years, and I brought in a slightly different focus around information behaviour, touched a little bit on information literacy there. So the first survey was in 2014, and you can, when you get the slides, you can have a look if you're interested. This survey from 22, just when we had our first meeting to do this, was to look at the impact of recent technology development. So there have been, there's a lot of new services around now that there weren't in the original survey, looking at use of technology during the pandemic and wondering about how that pandemic might impact on future use. We're all in a hybrid meeting here, and it doesn't seem too weird. Whereas, 7 or 8 years ago, this would be quite extraordinary. Technology and digital technology in all its variety. So we're not just looking at musicology software and resources and services. We're looking at how people do their research in the field of musicology. So what do we mean by musicology? The American Musicological Society website describes musicology as the scholarly study of music. Musicology research focuses on various aspects: history, its role in society, its structure, aesthetics, perception, and its performance. Debbie, I'm sure later on can correct that if she wishes. So musicologists are people who do research into music of all different types, and you'll see a whole range of different fields in a few moments. We're looking at the pandemic and how, when the pandemic hit, the analog in research was removed for all sorts of reasons. And so there was a digital turn in music around performance, music education, and music listening. There's been a lot of research around how the pandemic impacted on music performance, education, and listening. We're looking at a new area. And we're linking this. I think it's important to, in our context, in this, is to consider this as some kind of relationship with DH, with digital humanities. So looking back at what Claire Warwick said, 2012, but she was hot here. Humanities scholars are not Luddites. They simply behave differently from scientists and many social scientists when interacting with physical and digital information. So we're looking at some of looking at our musicologist behaviour within that digital humanities context and the impact of the pandemic. Digital humanities, as we all know, has become a discipline in itself, and musicology is broadened from a. If you're looking at digital musicology, that focused originally with computational analytics, and now there's a much broader spread. So a lot of musicology sectors, as it were, are all able to use technology to do their research. So musicology has become gradually a DH discipline, I would say. So the context for that. So I'm sure we all remember, many higher education institutions required academic staff to shift their teaching online during the pandemic. Yes. Many of us doing non-COVID related research had to pause our research activities to enable us to focus on teaching. This came up a lot in the survey. The pandemic impacted on our travel and our access and had some notable impacts in research. One, broadening the gender gap in publishing. Studies have shown that women published less during the pandemic because they were involved in caring duties, and so reinforcing the typical gender gap there. And so that was something that we need to consider that within our research. The pandemic negatively affected people's mental health, reduced the collaborations. I think it was hard to get to know people online if you didn't know them previously. If you did know them previously, then you could develop on those relationships. But there was definitely impact on collaborations, particularly through those chance meetings in our conferences, which is how France and I started working. Community building, and social capital were also impacted. So we're looking at quite a wide variety of impacts of this pandemic. In terms of our participation, we attempted to get a global response to our survey. So we had nearly 600 usable responses from this one. We had 600 plus in the previous survey. So we did about the same sort of numbers. We had help in promoting the link in the survey from various musicological societies. There are lots of them around the world, so we went to them and said, please send this around to your members. And we used our own the main list and social media as we would, and we went back to participants in the previous survey who had said we could go back to them, because we collected their emails separately from their responses in the previous survey. Not everyone could actually remember if they'd done the previous surveys, which, that we're doing a lot of surveys, so it's not really, I wouldn't remember a survey I did 7 years ago, so it's not really surprising they weren't sure. So that's where the yellow patches are. Just some basic bits before we go into more detail for their free text. So we found that the scale on the left, the digital self-perceived digital expertise, goes from 1 on the left, not very expert, to 5 on the right, very expert. And their use of preference for digital and physical resources goes across there. That's the orange against the blue. So people who've got low digital skills prefer physical resources. Okay, good. That's perhaps obvious, but we might come back to that later. The table on the right shows preference per speciality. There you can see a big range of different musicology specialities: systematic, computational, music psychology, popular music, ethno, performance, etc. And these approaches, these specialities, correlate quite nicely inversely with their preference for resource. So the systematic, the computer coding people, they are very they much prefer digital, all the way across the music libraries and archives people who much prefer physical. Well, no, they much prefer digital, but the gap between digital and physical is not so large, isn't it? Their preferences have changed during the pandemic a little bit. If we look at the one on the right, that's perhaps a bit more helpful, and that shows that if you add the yellow and the grey together, then the preferences changed most in ethnomusicology, working with physical and objects and activities, and again left the computational people didn't really see such a change in their preferences for format of sources for their research. Then we got on to the free text questions, and musicologists still have got a lot to say. We found that we had so much full text coming back from these from the participants in the original survey, and this time again, our researchers were very free with their frustrations, their rewards, their risks, limitations, benefits, changes, and that was great. It gave us a really big corpus of text to analyse. We imported we used Opinio for the survey. We downloaded the spreadsheet. We imported that into NVivo as a spreadsheet, which enabled us to use the NVivo spreadsheet analytics to help us organise some of the data. But then we went manually towards the free text codes, and we coded them all manually. That took a bit of time, because there were 600 of them, but we got there in the end. We also had a warn you, if you are thinking of doing a collaborative project using NVivo in the future, and one of you is on an Apple product, and the other is on a PC, then it will be very difficult for you to share your data between you, because Apple NVivo or NVivo Mac doesn't talk very well to NVivo PC. NVivo PCs talks much clearer to Mac than the other way around. So just when you're planning your work, that's just something to bear in mind. So it did add on a little bit of time for us to sort that out. The things that we came up with through reading and rereading the full text, obviously they were themed by the questions around frustrations, rewards and risks, but we found that these themes sort of appeared across all of the questions. They weren't just limited to one particular question. And we both came up with these themes together and separately, and we did cross-checking against our coding as well to ensure there was some consistency there. So we found these were the things that came up a lot: individual changes, social aspects, changes in the discipline, learning new skills, interaction, and teaching and learning. Teaching and learning came up in a research survey. Back to that. So in terms of individual changes around human interaction, remote working, use of digital materials, for better or worse, Zoom is here to stay. Thank you, participant number 156. My thesis has changed and gone towards digital archives and will continue here. Use of digital sources to establish if the content merits an in-person follow-up visit. So straight away, people were changing the way their behaviour around the use of this technology. They were using Zoom. They were switching from physical archives to digital. They were checking first to see if worth visiting about. Technology, without Zoom, we could not have any interaction. Zoom conferences are pretty cool. Okay, so these are quite positive. We organise a hybrid conference. I do that again. Brought scholars from all over the world. It it will remain an option, but it should be used only in situations where it's absolutely impossible to attend in person. We had quite extremes, as you might expect, in terms of response. Virtual meetings are extremely comfortable. I don't want to do 3 hours of public transport for only 1 hour of meeting anymore. So, you know, we can all recognise these comments, I'm sure. In terms of changes in the discipline itself, many they've had, this person saying, they've had many changes, none of them huge or transformative, but changes in habit and standard operating procedure they recognise have been huge. So not just Zoom conferences, but all sorts of impacts on their use of technology to do their work. Learning new skills, lots of people said, great, I became, you know, accepted technology more. People who were reluctant could see the use of technology, the value of this. You know, let's just, you know, remind ourselves that digital humanities, Claire Warwick said at the beginning, then you're not Luddites. There's a view that people researching humanities are not very technically minded, hence, I suppose, the rising of DH. And becoming more open to digital tools, modes of operation, and modes of thinking, and starting to question what is musicology itself. So this is an important question within the field, and there are a lot of discussions right now in musicology research around what musicology is, because the influence has been so strong from the technology that's starting to change the nature of the discipline. Some people are saying, well, we're saying we're technology focused, but it's only just Zoom. So there, you know, again, with 600 people, you're going to get quite a wide range of views. We didn't do sentiment analysis, by the way. We might do that another time just to see if that works. And it does actually work pretty well. Look at this now. Okay. And around equity and inclusion, fantastic. Technology decenters the world, allows for amazing interchange of ideas and global conversation. And you know, ethnomusicology is about finding out about global musics. So the global nature of it, of Zoom, etc., made it much easier to find out about, to get access to far-flung places, but also to work alongside people from other places. Much more remote work, increasing collaboration and involving underrepresented scholars, expanding access, helping underrepresented and marginalized groups, keeping you know, online versions of conferences cost less, so they were more inclusive, and putting resources available online, open access again. So there was a move towards inclusivity there. It was reckoned that recognised that there were times when the global network opened their doors through technology when it suited their interests, and now they're closing those doors again. Another instance where the global north has abused the global south when it suits them, and denied access when it being advantageous in the global south to continue accessing those records. So the lockdown has started around open access, and you know, even within the UK, there are universities that benefit from transformative agreements in terms of access to journals, and other universities that don't benefit to those because they don't have the budgets that the Western universities have. So the open nature of information sharing during the pandemic has rolled back a little bit since then. Something we should. People keep going back to conferences and colloquia, and here's someone saying we won't go back to in person. I know there's an in-person one happening down the road in a few days' time. So there's a lot of views, and you can sort of pick and choose your opinion. But as global travel becomes less common, I think an element of conferences being online is extremely helpful and important to people who are not able to travel for budget or health or family reasons, all sorts of reasons. So I think it would be great if conferences continue to have online tracks. But you know, not everybody agrees with that. So the person number two, if we send the message that digital conferences are as good as or better than, then we'll be shooting ourselves in the foot, because we won't be asking for so much money, and then we'll have our budgets cut. So that's one way of looking at things. But I think that we can, you know, we should look at how digital sits with in person, and you know, try to get that balance right. I think, you know, in terms of our teaching, for example, having the digital and the in-person, that seems to work quite well. How can we, maybe we can take ideas from that into the conference. Yeah, we have to think through hybrid and you know, and experience hybrid work and try to make that work. I think that not meeting is an interesting one in person has led people to be much more suspicious of one another, convinced that some people have bad motives and voice opposition in ways that needlessly insulting. You know, not everybody is splintering into groups, but I think, you know, that does raise the issue around communication effectively online, and that is that's a challenge we need to address. Okay, even though we were asking people about their research, a lot of them talked about their teaching and learning, because they were told not to do research, and they had to redevelop their teaching materials, turn them online, change from physical to online, and then to hybrid, have increased caring responsibilities, looking after colleagues' work who were out with COVID, and lots of people had no time to do research during the pandemic because they were focusing on teaching and had no help from the institution and poor technical conditions. And but there were some benefits there, having students submit videos, and getting people to think about the way that they're teaching, because music online and doing music teaching using Zoom is really challenging, because there's a lag in the audio between me really saying this and you hearing that, which is why we got feedback when I turned off the speaker. So when you're playing an instrument together on Zoom, then that just doesn't work. So it's really hard to teach people music online using Zoom, unless you are just saying things to them and then they are playing them back to you. And you know, those challenges are ones that they still happen in terms of Zoom. You know, you can't have a jam session on live with people in Kazakhstan, no matter what software people say, you just haven't. No one's got the gear to do that. But if you can do it, and you can do it work, you can make those pianos smoke. And Zoom, fantastic. Everybody loved Zoom because it was you know, it facilitated a lot. But here, teaching from one's home has something emotional and beautiful about it. It saved us from being completely isolated, and it was a lifesaver. But we need to just save ourselves from becoming forever dependent on technology. So there's some reservations there amongst these participants in terms of technology, but they can see the benefits. So a storyline that we've sort of pulled together from these quotations and more highlighted here. But for these musicologists, for these participants anyway, the tech skills were essential. They recognised they were essential to survival. They discovered the potential of that technology in doing their research. They saw the benefits, and particularly repeatedly mentioned how great it was they could access materials in far-flung collections online. But it's not the same as looking at the original score, and it's not the same as the original score because you can't examine the thumbprints and all sorts of things. But this is something, you know, that always going to be faced with, I think, in terms of digital and physical. There seems to be a willingness to work more collaboratively, even if the opportunities to do that are reduced by the limitations of the video conferencing technology. But there seemed to be, coming from this, compared to our previous survey, people were talking more about working with others, and the lone researcher was not so visible in this particular set of responses. And people did identify new topics and approaches that they could use in the survey, which is promising for a broader musicology church with computational and mainstream musicology all communicating together more effectively, because there's been quite a bit of a split between the hardcore computational musicologists and the. So the survey raised our awareness of the raised awareness of the technology's practical potential, and it affects mainly two pillars: communication, social structure, and access to research materials. Those are the two really important themes that came out, and these are going to have impact on methodology. So as we are keen to communicate our findings to developers, we recommend that they focus on the added value of technology to normal working processes and demonstrate that in the software itself, and please make things easy, because the complexity of the information appliance is that of the task, not the tool. Technology, please, visible. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
Thank you.
I will stop the recording now.